We are now on part 10, and we're not even done. We probably have about maybe two more sessions before I end, unless there's just lots more information that I need to cover. And this, of course, is Know Your Enemy to fight the battle successfully. Last session, I went into more on the occult, highlighting verses and defining what mediums or spiritists, as they are also known as, familiar spirits, soothsaying, witchcraft, sorcery, which are interchangeable, divination, and fortune telling are. And once again, I have to correct something I said because I don't want to just put out information that's not correct. That would it probably was confusing, and I know it would be confusing otherwise. I had mentioned that the slave girl, the last verses or the last scriptures we looked at was in Acts 16 on the slave girl. And I had mentioned that she had a spirit of divination and brought her mother or her master's profit through fortune telling, and that she would have been referred to as a medium or spiritist, but that's not what I meant. I wasn't paying attention. Okay. And what I meant to say was that she would have been referred to as a soothsayer. The soothsayers are also those who tell people's future. So forgive me for that. And then mediums or spiritists are involved specifically in the practice of necromancy, which is defined as the practice of magic involving communication with the dead, specifically. And I just want to mention, as communication with the dead still takes place today, and things that have come to light within the last year with a specific organization, BLM, who had been, they came out, they did an interview actually, specifically speaking that they were involved in invoking the spirits of the dead. And so I don't doubt that. That was the case in that matter, as they were being interviewed and specifically said this was something that they were doing, invoking spirits or African or ancestral worship, specifically like African spirits. So they have been and likely continue to be in contact with demonic spirits, showing that although what they claim to be doing appears to be good on the surface, there is demonic inspiration behind them. And of course, no Christian should be following suit with something like that because it's a deception. And there is much going on today that you will only see through spiritual discernment from the Holy Spirit. Otherwise, you will fall for it. And I want to add concerning the fortune-telling slave girl that it is clear, however, that a demonic spirit was inspiring or guiding or behind her fortune-telling. Now, I also want to mention, since it was kind of brought up in discussion, the reality of psychics, palm readers, and the use of tarot cards today, which are all occult practices seeking knowledge from other sources other than God, which can open a person up to demonic spirits. And demonic spirits, have access to information about people excuse me, and personal information. And so we also have to be aware of and discerning of false prophets or people who prophesy by evil spirits, or people that just speak and pretend that they know that they're hearing from God and they're not hearing from God. And they know information about you personally, making it look like it's from God. But they can also potentially tell you your address, how much money you have in your bank account, for example, and other things that wouldn't be easily known information, but is of no benefit to the person, nor gives glory to God. And that's kind of like how you know that it might be some other spirit supplying that information if it does not bring some type of glory to God, or edification to you, or confirm something that you believe God spoke to you yourself. All right, so now I want to define those three terms that I just mentioned. We already looked at fortune telling, so we're going to look at psychic, tarot, in reference to the tarot cards, and palm reading. And the word psychic is from the Greek word psyche, which means soul, the mind, the will, and the emotions. And an individual with exceptional gifts for telepathy, clairvoyance, which I'm going to define that too, just so we can be clear, mediumship, or prophecy. It's also defined as a sensitive, like a person is referred to as a sensitive. I'm going to define that, who can intuit and reveal the future, or facts, thoughts, and feelings unknown to him or her. Okay, so I'm going to define telepathy, clairvoyance, sensitive, and intuit, just for better understanding of what that means when it comes to the psychic. I'm going to go to Google. And so here it says telepathy is the supposed communication of thoughts or ideas by means other than the known senses, being something a so-called psychic is able to do. And then clairvoyance is the supposed faculty of perceiving things or events in the future or beyond normal sensory contact. And then let's see if it's here. Okay, here we go. And then the psychic being referred to as a sensitive, like a noun, a person, means here a person who is believed to respond to occult influences. And then lastly, intuit. It says that they're a sensitive person who can intuit and reveal the future. So intuit means to understand or work out by instinct. So they apparently know what they know by instinct, but it's usually some sort of spirit that is informing them of whatever information they are receiving. Okay, and then tarot and tarot cards. Tarot is actually a collection of 78 images representing an ancient and universal archetypes, as well as situations that might arise in the course of the lifetime of an individual. And this collection is arranged in the form of a pack of cards, which are the tarot cards. and is used to gain insights into psychology and metaphysics, as well as foretelling the future. So both psychics and then, those who use tarot cards are involved in revealing or foretelling the future. And then I just want to define psychology and metaphysics as it relates here. See, I might have to type those in because I don't think I have them stored. Oh no, I do have psychology here. I mean, most people probably know psychology has to do with the study of the human mind and how it relates to behavior. Like here it says, it's the study of the human mind and its functions, especially those affecting behavior in a given context. And then metaphysics, which is a word that I wasn't really familiar with, is more of a philosophy type idea, which I'll probably have to type it in. Let's see. Metaphysics. Okay. And I want to go down here. There's lots of definitions, but this one is pretty simple. So here, according to PBS, it says metaphysics is a type of philosophy or study that uses broad concepts to help define reality and our understanding of it. But it's more concept based and not doesn't have anything to do with anything physical, really. So it's based on concepts and not something that you can prove necessarily. All right. And now, palmistry, or also known as palm reading, is the science of determining personality characteristics and the overall life potential of a human being by reading the lines and other characteristics of their hands. I'm not sure how they pull that off. It says, when giving a reading, a palmist reads the shape of the hands and fingers, the length of the fingers, and the lines. And it's said to have its roots in Indian astrology and in Roman fortune telling. So all of these things, psychics, tarot cards, tarot readers, palmists, or palm readers, are all, in a sense, like fortune tellers. And God never left our lives, and for us to determine anything about our lives in the hands of other people that are most and more than likely influenced by evil spirits, people like fortune tellers, psychics, and so on, and the worthless, unprofitable imaginations of their minds. Okay, so I want to go back to the book of Enoch, which I covered in some detail in a prior session on where I was talking about who we are dealing with when it comes to our enemy. And I talked about the spirits of the Nephilim, or Nephilim, who are the children of the angels and women that remain in the earth and are called evil spirits, according to God. They were called evil spirits, unclean spirits, also referred to as demons, who are wreaking havoc in the earth today still. And until God puts them along with Satan and the other angels that fell with Satan in the lake of fire on that great day. So we're going to look at two different versions of the book of Enoch. where it shows us where these angels called the Watchers taught men occult practices. That's where it originated from. So we're going to look at this one first. Oh, this one here. Okay, so it's entitled Rebels Among the Watchers. And here it says, and it came to pass when the sons of men had increased, that in those days there were born to them fair and beautiful daughters. And the angels, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them. And they said to one another, come, let us choose for ourselves wives from the children of men, and let us beget for ourselves children. So apparently they had the ability to do so. And Semyaza, who was their leader, said to them, I fear that you may not wish this deed. I'm going to make this bigger. There we go. Okay, so it says, and Semyaza, who was their leader, said to them, I fear that you may not wish this deed to be done, and that I alone will pay for this great sin. And they all answered him and said, let us all swear by oath, or swear an oath and bind one another with curses, so not to alter this plan, but to carry out this plan effectively. So they were easily persuaded. And then they all swore together and all bound one another with curses to it. And they were in all 200, and so there were 200 of them, and they came down on Ardis, which is the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called the mountain Hermon because on it they swore and bound one another with curses. And these are the names of their leaders. I will not go through and try to pronounce all of those. So moving on to the very next verse, 6.8 here, it says, these are the leaders of the 200 angels and all the others with them. And they took wives for themselves, and everyone chose for himself one each. And they began to go into them and were promiscuous with them. And I'm not sure what that means, what that word means there. I don't know if they mean that they had several wives or what, but it says, and they were promiscuous with them, and they taught them charms and spells. And they showed them the cutting of roots and trees. Those are cutting of roots and stuff. That's like what they do in witchcrafts. And well, this is all witchcraft, teaching them the charms and spells, the cutting of roots and trees. And then I wanted to look at the other version and how it put that same verse. It says here, then they took wives, each one choosing for himself, whom they began to approach and with whom they cohabited, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and the dividing of roots and trees. Going back here to some verses down. Okay. If it will let me. Looks like my computer's having. All right, let's. Okay, this has never happened. All right, give me a moment. Okay, here we go. All right, so I want to start here where it says, and Azazel taught men. So after they went in and had children with these women says that this particular angel taught men to make swords and daggers and shields and breastplates, and he showed them the things after these and the art of making them, bracelets, ornaments, and the art of making up the eyes and beautifying the eyelids, makeup, and the most precious stones and all kinds of colored dyes, and the world was changed. And there was great impiety and much fornication, and they went astray, and all their ways became corrupt. Then it says, Amazarach, it's the best way I can say it, taught all those who cast spells. He taught all those who cast spells and cut roots. Amaros, the release of spells. So that means like whatever spell was cast, he taught them how to undo it. And then Barachiel taught the astrologers. And Kokobio, portents, that's like omens, which I'll define. And Tamiel taught astrology, and Azradel taught the path of the moon. And at the destruction of men, they cried out, and their voices reached heaven. So them teaching all of these things caused much havoc or destruction on the earth. And I want to read it over here in this translation as well. And here it says, moreover, Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, the fabrication of mirrors, and the workmanship of, workmanship of bracelets and ornaments, the use of paint, the beautifying of the eyebrows, the use of stones of every valuable and select kind, and all sorts of dyes, so that the world became altered. So all of these things they taught changed the world. It says, impiety increased, fornication multiplied, and they transgressed and corrupted all their ways. And then Amazarach taught all the sorcerers, the dividers of roots. Armors taught, and their names are a little different based on the different translations. It's spelled differently. So here it says, Armors taught the solution of sorcery, basically how to undo it. And then Barkael taught the observers of the stars, that being astrologers. Then Akabil taught signs, that being omens, which I'll define. And then Tamiel taught astronomy. It said astrology in the other translation. And Asaradel taught the motion of the moon, and men being destroyed cried out, and their voice reached heaven. So sorcery, magic, the casting of spells, and therefore witchcraft, omens or signs, which I said I will define, and astrology are all linked back to these angels. That's where we see the first instance of these things in the earth. The angels that committed fornication, as God calls it, with women, and caused the earth to be full of evil. They taught their wives, and most certainly they taught their children, their offspring as well, the Nephilim, the giants, who are now the evil spirits, unclean spirits, demonic spirits in the earth. They taught them sorcery, they taught them witchcraft, magic, astrology, and it trickled down in history up to today. Now remember, their offspring are the disembodied spirits, which I just referenced, called evil spirits, unclean spirits, demons that God said would remain in the earth. They would remain in the earth even though they were disembodied, meaning, their bodies were destroyed in the flood, but their spirits remained. So they are still in the earth, and no doubt they are still using witchcraft and sorcery and such against men, as well as inspiring men to use witchcraft and sorcery and keeping the practices of astrology going. So they taught men things that we were never supposed to know. And I'm going to go back and define omens because I mentioned that as omens is also referred to as portents, portents, also referred to as signs. So I want to just define that since it was brought up. And this is what these angels taught men. So an omen is something that happens that supposedly indicates something good or evil to come. Okay, that's really general. So, and then another definition says that an omen is an event or happening that you take as a sign of something to come. They are seen as either good or bad. And it's believed to be a bad omen if, say, a black cat crosses your path or if it rains on your wedding day. According to one definition, it's a phenomenon that is believed to foretell the future, often signifying the advent of change. People in ancient times believed that omens brought a divine message from their gods. And we should know who their gods are by now. I know I say every time that these are the fallen angels that are usually referenced as gods, lowercase g. Then another definition I came across for omen is an event taking place in the natural world that is said to presage a far more important event in the life of the observer, whoever observes whatever happens, for better or for worse. An omen can be a dream, a cloud, a rainstorm, the sudden perception of a plant or flower, the appearance of an animal or bird, or a natural event such as a falling stone. So it's basically superstition. It's like superstition, believing in something that, you don't really have any evidence backing that thing that happens will cause something else to happen. And it was those angels that taught this stuff. Then there's astrology that they taught, which is defined as the divination of the supposed influences of the stars and planets on human affairs and terrestrial events, meaning events that happen on the earth, by their positions and aspects. Another definition states that it is the divination of the stars for the purpose of determining future human affairs or, again, and terrestrial events. So most people are familiar with horoscopes and the zodiac or zodiac signs. And these are things that are linked to astrology and are a no-no, especially for Christians, as it has been condemned by God. A horoscope is an astrological chart or diagram representing the positions of the sun, moon, planets, astrological aspects, and sensitive angles at the time of an event, such as the moment of a person's birth. The word horoscope is derived from the Greek words hora and skopos, meaning time and observer. And the Bible has referred to those people who would look to the stars and such for signs as observers of the times. Horoscope is also defined as a diagram of the relative positions of planets and signs of the zodiac at a specific times, usually at one's birth, for use by astrologers. and they use it to infer individual character and personality traits and in foretelling events of a person's life. So the zodiac, according to one definition, is a belt of the heavens within about 8 degrees either side of the ecliptic, which is the plane of Earth's orbit around the sun, including all apparent positions of the sun, moon, and most familiar planets. It is divided into 12 equal divisions or signs. And we know the signs: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. And then Merriam-Webster defines it as an imaginary band in the heavens centered on the ecliptic that encompasses the apparent paths of all the planets and is divided into 12 constellations or signs, each taken for astrological purposes. So personally, I know I used to swear by what would be considered as my zodiac sign, and I know many others do, but once I learned that this is something that God opposes, I didn't have much trouble severing ties with it. And when I was living, I say when I was living in sin, I started to get deep in it because I didn't know any better. And I was trying to figure out if a certain person or if I was compatible to a certain person, like if they were my soulmate. I know there are people who refer to others being their soulmate or trying to find out who their soulmate is. So I kind of got that far in it for just a short period of time, though. I quickly got out of that. And so I was trying to see if someone was compatible with me or I was compatible with them based on astrological information. But thank God for a friend from high school that I shared this with who told me that God, the Bible, warns against such. And after doing research online, because I was like, let me see, let me look this up myself because I hadn't heard that before. And I got mixed responses when I did my research. But I decided, after all, it was best to leave it alone, especially after somebody warning me. And, you know, when we involve ourselves in stuff like this, we start to entertain our enemy, evil spirits, and open ourselves up to much deception because then we are doing things their way and not God's way. So let's look at some references to astrology in the Bible, starting with Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 16 through 19. While we wait for this to load. And this is going to be in the English Standard Version. I want to make sure it's done loading before I attempt to read. All right. I guess I need to, okay, there we go. Okay, so starting with verse 16, this is under idolatry being forbidden. So here it says, beware lest you act corruptly Moses speaking to the children of Israel, what God spoke to him. It says, beware lest you act corruptly by making a carved image for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, because that's what the other nations were doing, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth. And beware lest you raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the host of heaven, you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them. Things that the Lord your God has allotted to all peoples under the whole heaven. And then let's look at Deuteronomy 17, verses 2 through 5. Also in the English Standard Version, ESV. It says, if there is found among you within any of your towns that the Lord your God is giving you, a man or woman who does what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God, in transgressing his covenant, and has gone and served other gods and worshiped them, or the sun or the moon, or any of the host of heaven, which I have forbidden, and it is told you, and you hear of it, then you shall inquire diligently. And if it is true and certain that such an abomination has been done in Israel, then you shall bring out your gates to your gates that man or woman who has done this evil thing, and you shall stone that man or woman to death with stones. So God always brings, he brings this up in connection with worshiping other gods, because it's all connected. And so the host of heaven, specifically, because it says the sun or the moon or any of the host of heaven. The host of heaven include the sun, the moon, the stars, and the planets. And for us to look to them to give us any indication about our lives, about ourselves, can be likened to worshiping them, and is occult in nature and practice. Then let's look at Job 31, verses 26 through 28. And here it says, if I beheld the sun as an object of worship when it shone, or the moon going in its splendor, and my heart became secretly enticed by them, and my hand threw a kiss from my mouth in respect to them, this also would have been a heinous sin, calling for judgment, for I would have denied God above. So it has that, this is like idolatry in this case. And so while it might not be divination, it involves worshiping. Here he says the sun and the moon. It involves worshiping them as if they have some supreme influence or power over one's life, and is forbidden. It's considered a sin, because it says that in doing so, you would be denying God above. All right, so we're going to go over Isaiah and then Revelation, because I'm going to tie the two, what's being said here in Isaiah and what's said in the book of Revelations. And we're going to start with verse 8 here. Okay. I'm going to go do 8 through 15. It says, now then, hear this, you who live a luxuriant life And we'll find out who Isaiah is talking about shortly. You who dwell safely and securely, who say in your mind, in your heart, and it says in your mind, I am the queen. And there is no one besides me. I shall not sit as a widow, nor know the loss of children. But these two things shall come to you abruptly in one day: loss of children and widowhood. They will come on you in full measure, in spite of your many claims of power through your sorceries, in spite of the great power of your enchantments. For you, Babylon, this is who Isaiah is talking about, have trusted and felt confident in your wickedness. You have said, no one sees me. Your wisdom and your knowledge have led you astray. It's wisdom and knowledge that does not come from God. It comes from the devil, the evil one. And you have said in your heart, that is your mind, I am, and there is no one besides me. Therefore, disaster will come on you. You will not know how to make it disappear with your magic. And disaster will fall on you, for which you cannot atone with all your offerings to your gods. And destruction, about which you do not know, will come on you suddenly. Persist then, Babylon, in your enchantments and your many sorceries, with which you have labored from your youth. Remember, the watchers taught enchantments, they taught sorcery. So with which you have labored from your youth, perhaps you will be able to profit from them. Perhaps you may prevail and cause trembling. You are wearied by your many counsels. Just let the astrologers, the stargazers, those who predict by the new moons each month, stand up and save you from the things that will come upon you, Babylon. In fact, they, the stargazers, the astrologers, are like stubble. Fire burns them. They cannot save themselves from the power of the flame, much less save the nation. There is no blazing coal for warming, nor fire before which to sit. This is how they have become to you, those astrologers and sorcerers with whom you have labored. Those who have done business with you from your youth, each has wandered in his own way away from God. There is no one to save you. So here, God, through Isaiah, is talking about and pronouncing judgment on Babylon and their sorceries and their enchantments and such. And Babylon was a literal empire. It was a literal, like the Roman Empire, the Grecian Empire. It was an empire that the children of Israel, God, once they turned away from God, God allowed them to be taken captive and made slaves by Babylon, the Babylonian Empire. But Babylon is also a system. It's a world system that has been set up in the earth that does not acknowledge God and does things apart from God as if he doesn't exist. So it is a system that's been in place. I would say from the time that the watchers those angels had taught men sorcery and such. And it's still in the earth today, and it will still be in the last days. Well, we're in the last days, but it will be. And so, as I was saying, this system has been set up in the earth, and it doesn't acknowledge God, and it does things apart from God as if he doesn't exist. And it blatantly opposes God. And in this passage, God is condemning the astrologers, the stargazers, as they are in association with Babylon, with this system. So sorcery, witchcraft, idolatry are associated with this system along with these other things. And this is very significant as in the book of Revelation, the revelation of Jesus Christ and John's vision of Jesus and the things that are to take place in the end times, which we are here, we're there in the last days. I mean, I'm not saying we're in the last of the last, but it's been the last days since Jesus came. So John was shown about the mystery of Babylon. And we see this in Revelation 17, which I'm going to go to next. This is it's really interesting because of how God was tying this together when I was doing this study and how I saw the connection between Isaiah and Revelation. So here, we're going to start with verse 1. Says, then, well, it's entitled The Doom of Babylon. It says, then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, speaking to John, saying, come here, I will show you the judgment and doom of the great prostitute. That's what she's referred to, or Babylon's referred to as the great prostitute, who is seated on many waters, influencing nations. She with whom the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality, and the inhabitants of the earth have become intoxicated with the wine of her immorality. The kings of the earth mean just the men, the people in the earth. We are referred to as kings. It's not like a specific ruler. It's like in general, the people of the earth. And verse 3, and the angel carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was entirely covered with blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls. And she was holding in her hand a gold cup full of the abominations and the filth of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead, a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes, false religions, heresies, and of the abominations of the earth. So Babylon here is called the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth, on which God will bring judgment. And then verse 7 tells us that the beast, if you know anything about Revelation and the beast, it tells us in verse 7 that the beast carries Babylon. And the angel says here, said to John, I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. The 7 heads, and I believe those 7 heads are the 7 mountains. The mountains of government, education, business, family. Can't think of them all right now, but that's what I believe the 7 heads are. Okay, and then Revelation 13:2, which I'm not going to go to. So verse 7 tells us that the beast carries Babylon. Revelation 13:2 tells us that the dragon, who is Satan, gives the beast his power. his throne, and great authority. Let's look at how Babylon is described now in Revelations in verse 18. And here the angel describes to John that the woman whom you saw is the great city, that city being Babylon, which reigns over, and it's not necessarily a literal city, but it says which reigns over and dominates and controls the kings and the political leaders of the earth. That's so important. That's so key, because it speaks to a lot of things happening right now. So this Babylon, this system that doesn't depend on God, but it's depending on things other than God, which is usually demonic in nature, satanic in nature, says that it's reigning over and dominating and controlling the kings and the political leaders of the earth. And then I'm going to go to the next chapter, starting with verse 2. It says, the angel shouted with a mighty voice, saying, fallen, fallen, certainly to be destroyed is Babylon the Great. Okay. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a dungeon haunted by every unclean spirit, and a prison for every unclean and loathsome bird. For all the nations have drunk from the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. And I believe, just by looking at that immorality is really referring to the worship of just idolatry, in a sense, disregarding God and doing things that are opposite and contradictory to God's ways. So for all the nations have drunk from the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings and political leaders of the earth have committed immorality with her. And the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth and economic power of her sensuous luxury. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people. That being a reference to God's people coming out of this Babylonian system, so that you will not be a partner in her sins and receive her plagues. For her sins, crimes, transgressions have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her wickedness and crimes for judgment. And then I'm going to go down here to verse 11. So it says, and merchants of the earth will weep and grieve over her being Babylon, this system, because no one buys their cargo, their goods, their merchandise anymore. And then verse 12 mentions some of this merchandise, but I wanted to highlight verse 13 specifically, and specifically in the New King James, but I'll read this one too. So it says there's cinnamon, spices, incense, perfume, frankincense, wine, olive oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle and sheep, and cargoes of horses and chariots and carriages. And then the last part says that the merchandise included slaves and human lives, which is quite key. And then the New King James Version uses different wording here, which is why I want to read it also. And I'll be wrapping it up shortly. So here it says that in addition to these things, the merchandise of Babylon are bodies and souls of men. So it says the merchandise of Babylon, of this system in the earth, includes the bodies. Just want to highlight that. Includes the bodies, and then the Amplify says slaves in place of bodies and souls of men. So I'm going to put a thought in your mind, and then I'll talk about this in a future session on the Illuminati. So when you hear this about the merchandise, including bodies, including slaves, including the souls of men, think in context of sex trafficking, mind control, child sacrifice, because these are things that are sadly happening before our eyes as well as in secret today. So I'm going to touch more on that, and hopefully in the next session, because it's all related. It's all related. And that word sorcery that was used concerning Babylon, Isaiah mentioned it about Babylon and her sorceries. And I know I mentioned this before too, that it's the Greek word pharmakia, which I know I've been saying I'm going to go into it, but as soon as I can get to it, I'm going to delve more into that. But let's look at this last verse on astrology before I wrap this session up. And that's in Jeremiah chapter 10, verses 1 through 3 in the New Living Translation. As soon as it loads up. Okay, it's entitled Idolatry Brings Destruction. So this is a theme. This is the theme throughout history. Like all of this stuff is like from the beginning to the end. It's really important to just take note of what God's saying and how this applies, how it applied then and how it applies today, and how it may apply to our own lives and others around us. So here in verse 1, highlight. Jeremiah says, "Hear the word of the Lord hear the word that the Lord speaks to you, O Israel. This is what the Lord says: Do not act like the other nations who try to read their future in the stars. Do not be afraid of their predictions. Like, do not fear them. Do not give honor or respect to that stuff, even though other nations are terrified by them. Their ways are futile and foolish." So I'm going to end it there in that part of that verse. So God does not want us to look to the stars to determine anything about our lives. The stars, the moon, the sun, the planets. He doesn't want us to look to those things to determine anything about our lives. The angels taught men to do these things when God never intended for it to be that way. There are Christians, apparently, who believe that God has given us the astrology teachings to learn about ourselves. Them not understanding what the real source of these things are, as we have seen. The real source of them were rebellious angels in the beginning. And as we have seen, God speaks against this and spoke against those who practiced it. So I'm going to end it there and pick up next time, hopefully delving into Pharmakeia and the relation to medical drugs, drug industry, to make today's medical industry, and along with shedding light, play on words there, on the Illuminati, Freemasons, and Satanists, who play a large role in the things going on in the earth right now, or right now and in the past, and will more than likely continue to play a role in the things going on, and this whole Babylonian system. So in the meantime, I would ask to please pray for me as I begin to expose these things, because the enemy doesn't like it when you're exposing them. So that ends this session until next time.